Well, I was intrigued to see that one of the country's top economists, Russell Lamberti, is joining Sakeliga, which is an organization that hasn't been around a long time. Russell, I've heard of the Afrikaanse Handels Institute, for instance, which has morphed into a lobby group for small business. There are various other organizations, AfriForum is one, but Sakeliga does seem to be making some great strides. And now with your appointment, my goodness, that's quite a coup for them.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity. Sakeliga has been around a bit longer than people think. They had a name change 2 or 3 years ago where they changed from AfriSaka to Sakeliga. They just had a bit of a rebranding kind of exercise there. So they have been around a bit longer. Got probably around 12,000 members, ranging from very small sole proprietor, small businesses to some fairly large members. I'm joining in September and joining a very capable team there. Pete Leroux, who leads the team there, is excellent, and some of the people I'm going to be working with are very, very good. So I'm looking forward to it's a pivot for me. It's a new challenge. I've been steeped in macro analysis for institutional investors and for professional investors for a long time now. I'll still be doing a little bit of that on the side, but my main gig now is really, I suppose, trying to help create a better operating environment in what has become an extremely difficult place to do business, Alec.
To move from econometrics, which is, as you say, more of a macro, an ETM, where you are now, more of a macro approach, to an activism. Certainly Sakeliga suggests to me that it is more of an activist kind of organization. Pivot is a word that many people use, but it's quite a radical change.
Yeah, and I suppose activism is one way you could describe it. Another way is advocacy. That might just be semantics. I think. Look, I've always had I've always developed that side of me, Alec, which there's describing how the world is. And, that's what you got to do for your clients. And then there's thinking about how the world ought to be or could be. And I think we're at a place in our country's trajectory, in our country's history, where things are coming to a point of potential real crisis. And I think I can lend my shoulder to the wheel a little bit in helping steer things back to a better course. I don't have delusions of grandeur as to what's achievable, but I think if enough of us put our heads down and put our thinking caps on and get our hands a bit dirty on trying to fix this mess that we find ourselves in, we might have a chance of actually coming out the other side with something to show for it. So yes, it is quite a pivot for me and quite a change. But I'm looking forward to applying the skills that I've acquired over the last 15 odd years, 16 years in my roles, very strongly in macro, to really keeping that analytical dimension going. Sakeliga is going to benefit substantially from that, but really how that gets then applied in the real world. And Sakeliga is doing some great stuff when it comes to challenging the state around very unfair and onerous BEE regulations, challenging municipal governments to be more honest and to be run more efficiently. These things I think have tremendous benefit, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So, but as I say, I'm not going to be ditching the macro stuff entirely. Going to be retaining some key select clients on the side, and I think having both of those roles in play will be a nice balance for me, and I'm really looking forward to the opportunity.
Highly articulate Pete Leroux, the head of Sakeliga, and last time he was on this program, we were talking about challenging through the legal routes. In other words, going to the courts and so on. Are you going to be playing a role there as well?
I will play some role there. I mean, it's certainly not my core strength, but more and more the cases that are either being brought directly by Sakeliga or in which they will choose to become a friend of the court, I think I will have a role What's needed often is very sound economic argument, putting together good economic data and evidence for a particular position. It's not always the swaying position or the position that judges necessarily like to get involved with. But certainly, so I don't necessarily see the legal side as being necessarily core to what I do, although I think it will pull me in, fairly substantially as we try and bolster our arguments. And I think if you try and bolster arguments from a few angles, that can only help. So I will play a kind of support role in that sense.
It is interesting, though, that we are in a constitutional democracy, and we're seeing increasingly, for instance, from China, how Beijing is now attacking its companies, effectively, companies that have listed offshore, and there's no right of recourse for those companies, Didi Global being the most recent example of it. However, in South Africa, being a constitutional democracy, we do have the courts of law that we can go to if you're a corporate entity, or in fact any entity in this country, and you feel that some others, or in this case government, is overstepping the mark, overstepping its power, etc. How much is there to be done? You mentioned right in the beginning, you spoke about the mess that South Africa is in. How deep is it, and is it extractable?
Yeah, look, tough question. I mean, short answer is it is very deep. If we look at things right now, we've had probably at least a year, or maybe about 9 months of kind of a sugar high recovery, off the back of what's been tremendous global stimulus, huge money pumping by central banks, very low rates, big fiscal interventions. That has created this sugar high. South Africa's experienced some of that, but at a structural level, SA is in a place where it really isn't probably properly measured in a kind of prolonged recession. The Reserve Bank's business cycle indicator shows us in a downturn since about 2013. So just an absolute record in the history books in terms of South African business cycle stuff. So very little dynamism in the South African economy, stifled by poor regulations, over-regulation, probably most importantly, just state incapacity, and really, I think, an advanced stage of state failure. Now, I think that creates two imperatives. The one is to protect yourself against that state failure in various ways. I think using the courts is one strategy. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all strategy. But certainly, to the extent that the courts can help you, to the extent that there's independent courts that make sound, sensible, rational judgments, one can and should use that avenue. I think that there are other practical ways that one can explore to as we say at Sakeliga, to state-proof oneself. Yes, and then of course, so there's a defensive posture in terms of state failure. And then there's kind of getting on the front foot and becoming proactive in stepping into realms of, let's say, a lapsed governance, where there's certain pockets of the country that are really just essentially ungoverned, and to somehow take up the mantle and start making some of these places work. It's not easy, it's not cheap, and it comes with various risks, not least of which is a kind of opposition from the state, because even though they might lapse in certain areas, they don't necessarily like people coming in and taking over. But this does start to push towards basic kind of human rights issues, basic kind of constitutional rights. If you don't have water in a town, I mean, that's literally a life and death situation. People need to be able to go in, provide those services, get them working again. And so, a lot of this is really coming to a head. And I think there's a very large sort of base of support and legitimization of where there is completely lapsed and failed governance for businesses, for local communities to kind of increasingly move into that space. It's simply, as I say, a matter of life and death for many people.
Have we hit rock bottom in South Africa? The fact that people like you and we are seeing more and more intelligent South Africans deciding to put, as you described it, their shoulders to the wheel to try and fix things rather than the easy route, which is immigration. Are we at a rock bottom, or is that the reason why, or is there another reason why you are prepared to stick around and fight for what you believe in?
Look, I think it's a brave call to say we're at rock bottom. I think that just purely from what's already baked into the cake, Alec, from what's gone before us in the previous, certainly 10 years, and if really 15 to 20 years, but really the last 10, the decay in the last 10 to 12 years has been pretty substantial. And the lagged effect of those things that are already baked into the cake, I think are still to come through. So I'd be surprised if it doesn't get a bit worse yet. And we know really from global experience that things can get a lot worse. If our political class really decides to close ranks, double down, and get extremely stubborn on their their grip on the country and on the economy, and if they start turning particularly kind of dirigiste and malicious, things can fall substantially further. I think in many ways my move is less to try and restore ANC policy, and really I think to try and help Sakeliga develop for their members, for their supporters, and for the broader business community, alternatives to what I see as, in some realms, an inevitable state failure. So I don't think I don't think a failed state is a future tense idea. I think we're living in it right now. It's not a singular event. It's not you don't wake up one morning and the state has failed. We're in an advanced period of state failure, and I see this as an incredibly exciting and very daunting as well challenge to in the midst of that, to try and latch onto opportunity and actually see if we can build something really good out of that lapsed governance, out of that failed governance. It doesn't mean that every department and every area of the state has failed or is failing. We luckily still have one or two areas that function. Probably the most importantly is the Reserve Bank at this point, which continues to maintain a fairly sensible policy, and the rand continues to hold up. But yeah, so I think it's actually an acknowledgement, Alec, that things are bad enough that we've got to start thinking about alternatives beyond the conventional paradigm, and that's intellectually exciting. It's professionally going to be very interesting, and there's no guarantees of success here, so there's risk involved as well. But I think it all stems from a fundamental love of the country, and a place that I think most of us at some level feels worth fighting for.